by welcoming everybody to our next edition of Business for Humanity, a journey of discovery for thought and change leaders who seek to reinvent capitalism. And today it's my very, very greatest pleasure to introduce a very, very special guest for a very, very special session. And I want to introduce it with a quote from the book that we will discuss today, which says, "It is mostly good news." And I think it was about time we start one of these sessions with good news. We have a vision and all the technologies we need to make a good start at crafting a life of dignity and quality for all people on Earth. And with that, we're going to have our session today about regenerative capitalism with a wonderful pioneer of sustainable thinking, Hunter Lovins, who's going to join us with her presentation in a second. And I only want to say one more thing about Hunter, and Kees is going to do the proper introduction. She wrote a book which had a subtitle which said, "Kickstarting Capitalism to Save Our Economic Ass." And I think that's a great way to start this session. So before we go into the main part, as usual, can I ask everybody to do a quick check-in on the chat? So if you want to share with us where you're coming from today, what your main role is, or what role you want to take on this call, and any ideas that you've come across that might be valuable for other people on the call in terms of how we can help to reduce our environmental footprint. So please check in at your leisure on the call. And with that, I'm going to ask Kees for a new little interesting fact, the fact of the month. Kees, what has caught your attention this month?
Well, you started off so positive and optimistic, and now I have to take us all down again with the fact of the month, because so we spend a year with the average temperature of 1.2, almost 1.20 above average, and reaching the highest average temperature ever recorded, general temperature recorded on the 21st of July, just a couple of weeks ago. So for those people that still don't get the message, we are in shit.
We are in trouble. And I think before we started the call, Hunter was sharing with us how she was trying to get cattle in safety through a fire. So I'm sure we're going to talk more about the hotting up of the climate. But I want to stick with the positive news. Let's see if we can.
Let's do that.
In that vein, let me introduce the panel as always. So Kees has already shown his face. Also very warm welcome to our researcher as always, Antoinette from the University of St. Gallen. Hey, Antoinette.
Hey.
There she is. And Silvio as the voice of the future. Hey, Silvio. And of course, all of you, all of us. It's wonderful to see so many people in the midst of the summer season, of the holiday season. Thank you for making the time and investing the time to come on this journey with us. So where do we go from here? A quick reminder as to what this series is all about. We are trying to create a review of all the alternatives to capitalism, which many, many intelligent friends and colleagues are promoting and proposing, to allow leaders, thought leaders, business leaders, political leaders to make some sense of that, and ultimately, based on a critical investigation, also find the conviction to engage themselves, either in the conversation about alternatives to capitalism, or even better, in the action to do something about it. And in that regard, let me also invite everybody to have a look at the website. So we've done our very best, not only to present Hunter in more detail on the website, but also give you a summary of the book that we're going to talk about, A Finer Future, that Hunter has co-authored, and lots of resources, including a preliminary review of regenerative economics, which is going to be the topic of today. In terms of what we're going to do over the better part of the next 2 hours, Kees is now going to, after one more warm-up question as always, Kees is going to introduce Hunter properly and then hand over to Hunter for what is really the magic part of this session. Hunter being one of the most prominent pioneers in sustainability, I think this is what we have been waiting for. Antoinette, as always, is going to lead us through the Q&A afterwards, and please put all your questions on the chat. And then I will take over to go, as usual, into the comparative meta-inquiry, and Kees is going to finish us off with a reality check. And let's see if Kees is going to stick to the positive or the hot news. We will find out. So I want to warm us up, as always, with a question that is going to help us to make sense of what we're going to hear and talk about today. And the question is, what is a circular economy. We're going to talk about regenerative economy, but circular is very closely connected to that. So put on the chat if you've got any views. And sorry, I might cover the screen here again, but just for 1 second. Anyone who's got a view on how to define the circular economy, or what are the constituent aspects of cradle to cradle? Martina, very good, very good. And until this time, we might not have so much effort with from cradle to grave. That might be the case. Adina, thank you. No waste case, yes, absolutely. Pascal, reusing where inputs can be reused, designed for reuse, and it's a contradiction. Walter, oh, that's very interesting. Closing loops. I go with all of that, and I'm going to hand over to Antoinette for a preliminary definition.
Yeah, I was thinking that this time probably the audience knows better than I know, but still, what is circular economy? Circular economy, and what we don't see the slides, is an economic system that focuses on minimizing waste and maximizing resource efficiency. So we saw that with you by continuously reusing, recycling, and restoring products and materials. Now, best known, this is normally captured by a butterfly diagram, which essentially shows on the one side the technical side, so better product design, manufacture, value chain optimization, closing the loop through expanding lifespan. Or if you look at it top down, you see the flows of finite materials into the system should be minimized, flows around the technical cycles should be minimized, and materials should also move slowly. And it has the green side, which depicts the biological cycle. And here, natural capital is rebuilt. So, for instance, through farming practices, which I'm sure we're going to hear from Hunter, that allow nature to rebuild soils and increase biodiversity. So that's just a little bit longer, but what every one of you already, I think, guessed or said correctly.
Wonderful, which also shows us that the concept of circular economy has really made an impact. And I must say, I was particularly intrigued when I was preparing for today's session, when I read that up to 95% of energy and resources are currently wasted in capitalist economies. And I think that explains why Hunter might have called it capitalism at some point. Clearly, there is something to be done about the way we are currently using our capitalist economy. And with that, I will hand over to Kees to properly introduce Hunter in today's topic.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go in depth into Hunter's track record. We can show it, and it's long and impressive. But I would like to start with a little personal anecdote. And I don't know, Hunter, if you still can remember this, that the first time that we met online, my son walked in the room and you connected with him. And until the day of today, he still remembers the lady with the cowboy hat, which I find just wonderful. It's such a part of your personality, of your track record. But what I would like to emphasize, what makes me really happy that you're in our midst, is that, and I hope you will also dive into this series, this webcast series is about an inquiry of how to change the capitalist system to not make it destructive but regenerative, because otherwise it is not sustainable. And you are one of the voices that is actually pro-capitalism. So we have had people already that criticize capitalism, and you do too, but you do that from another perspective than, let's say, a socialist perspective. And I find that really interesting and also important for our inquiry. So with having said that, I would like to give you the floor and invite people, as I do every time, that if you have any questions or remarks during Hunter's presentation, please leave them in the chat so we can pick those up later and share them with Hunter so she can answer them. So Hunter, the floor is yours.
And let's see if we can get it go. Welcome to the Anthropocene. When you were born, when I was born, we lived in a geologic era called the Holocene. It was where humans evolved. It was an unusually stable geologic era. It's not so stable anymore. And as has been said, we are the first generation to have dominion over the earth, likely the last to be able to save it. We have exceeded the planetary boundaries. This was Johan Rockström's original graph of it, where he said we had exceeded 4. Well, we've now exceeded 5 of them. Things like loss of biodiversity, the climate crisis. We are faced with what Royal Dutch Shell called drivers of change. When they try to figure out the future, they look for these drivers of change. You don't have a choice about this. They're coming at you. And we have a lot of them. And then the last, what I had called the sustainability imperative, a term that Harvard Business School stole, I would now call it the regenerative imperative, and you'll see why as I get into this stuff. Perhaps the most challenging is the climate crisis. Yeah, we are in a climate crisis. Wherever you go, we were talking earlier about the fire that I was in a couple of weeks ago. Fires now in Greece, fires in Chile when it's summer there. We're in a climate crisis. And we're not, in terms of the international community, doing anything about it. This is the rise in emissions plotted against the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change's COP meetings, Conference of Parties. 30 years now. We're about to go into COP 29. And in that time, emissions have doubled. The picture on the right is literally a river of shit. In case you mentioned we're in shit, this is a river of shit flowing out of the UN's blue zone at the Sharm el-Sheikh COP 27, when the sewers exploded into the UN meeting room. Perhaps a good metaphor. So how did we get into this mess? It was a somewhat deliberate act by 36 men who in 1947 met at a hotel outside Montreux, Switzerland, to rebuild the economy after World War II. Now, they did this with all best intentions. Europe was trashed, and they said, what should the economy be? They said, the most important thing is personal liberty. Government is evil. Personal liberty is best exemplified in a market, which is perfect, and therefore there should be no constraints on an individual. Ludwig von Mises was appalled at what National Socialism had done to wreck Europe. Friedrich Hayek was scared to death of the rise in the East of Soviet collectivism. Milton Friedman believed that the only legitimate economic actor is the individual, and they and 33 of their closest friends built what they called neoliberalism. They said, we are going back to the original roots of economics, the original liberal economists, and embedding their philosophy in a new set of economics. Friedman classically said, there is only one job for business, and that is to deliver value to owners. Full stop. That is corporate social responsibility. Make money. They they did very well. They got their members as advisors to every head of state on the planet. This is Hayek with Ronald Reagan. They went back to, or Friedman went back to the Chicago School of Economics, and they got this ideology into every economics class on earth. If you've had an economics class, this stuff's in your head. Wealth is the only measure of value. The individual is the only legitimate actor. Government is evil. They created the economic Nobel Prize. It isn't really a Nobel Prize. Alfred Nobel never commissioned it. It was put together by these guys and the Swedish Riksbank. But they use it to legitimize their members. Now, they were a fairly wonkish group, and for a while they labored away in obscurity until in 1971, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked this man, Lawrence Powell, to write a memo. How can business re-legitimize itself? After the 1960s, sex, drugs, rock and roll, Business was feeling beat up on. Powell wrote a memo, and you can go online and download this memo, and I highly recommend that you do, because this memo has shaped the world. He said, the American economic system is under attack. Business must learn that political power is necessary. We must use it assiduously and aggressively. He laid out 26 targets. Businesses, chambers of commerce, the Business Roundtable, schools, graduate schools, schools of all sorts, creating speakers bureaus, press, TV, the political arena. Powell said our job must be to discredit the old ideology. The old ideology coming out of the Great Depression, the New Deal, the idea that it is the role of government to take care of people, was pretty effectively discredited. And with the creation of these institutions, note the one in the middle, the Heritage Foundation, you may be hearing now about a document of the 2025 agenda put forth by the Heritage Foundation. Yeah, these guys are still around, because on the strength of the Powell Memorandum, they got 5 gazillionaires to each put something like $5 million for each of 5 years into creating and endowing these organizations. So they're all still here. They're all still active. And the Heritage Foundation Agenda 2025 would basically eliminate democracy. This is today, this is very real news. This is what the fight of the US election is all about. In 1980, Reagan got elected in the United States, Thatcher got elected in the UK, and they won. This became the global economic ideology. And much of the harm that has flowed since came from this. Up until 1980, all classes of people the world around were coming up together. After 1980, only the 1% has gained wealth. The bottom 20 is actually getting poorer. Nelson Mandela said it, poverty is not an accident, we created it. The good news, we created it, we can uncreate it. We know what causes it, we know what to do about it. We're not doing it yet. After the 2008 economic collapse, the 10 biggest banks are now bigger. Nice piece in the Financial Times. Bankers say they're flying blind. We don't fully understand what's happening in advanced economies. Well, if these guys don't, who the hell does? A man named Pavan Sukhdev, who had been a Deutsche banker, got together with a group called True Cost. They looked at what is profit. And they realized if you count the environmental cost as an economic cost, and it is, we are impoverishing ourselves, we are losing natural capital, no company on earth would be profitable. So what's wrong with business? Neoliberal economics is driving the world into collapse. This idea of shareholder primacy, the only thing that matters is driving value to owners, is legally wrong. Lynn Stout showed that. It's morally bankrupt. Business as usual has given us the world in peril that we now find ourselves. We need to rethink the fundamental logic. Markets are a great servant. They're a bad master. They're a terrible religion. We've confused that. What do you want? Is this the life that you want? Normal is wearing clothes you buy for work, driving through traffic in a car you're still paying for. To get to a job you need to pay for the clothes, the car, the house you leave vacant all day so you can afford to live in it. Are you happy? When you ask people this, you look at how GDP goes up and up and up. People are not so happy. We're in trouble because we don't have a good story. The old story told us who we were, what our place in the world was. We need a new story. What does it mean to be human? What is it that we want? What do we want the economy to give to us? Dana Meadows said this very well. It can't be predicted what's going to happen, but we can envision it and lovingly bring it into being. And the humble folk singer Pete Seeger said, the key to the future of the world is finding the optimistic stories and letting them be known. So let's create a new story. One, we have no choice. Business as usual, we are looking at global collapse, economic collapse, environmental collapse, social collapse. 2, we know how to solve these problems. 3, when you do it this way, you will make more money. It's better business. And it's what people want. Dr. Paul Lawrence at Harvard, Dr. Michael Pearson at Fordham say humans have 4 primary desires. We have a desire to get stuff. Once we have that stuff, we tend to try to protect it. And that's the neoliberal narrative. Get stuff, defend it. Human is more than that. Say the scientists, humans have a drive to bond, to be with other people. And we have a drive to create meaning. This is the skull of an old man. He's toothless. This was found in a cave in southern Africa. In Africa, several million years ago, there were many tribes of pre-humans. Most of them went extinct. This is a skull from the tribe of humans that did not go extinct. So why do we care? He's old and he's toothless. That means somebody took care of him, that he could become old, and fed him even when he didn't have teeth. He is a member of a tribe of pre-humans who cared. It wasn't just every person for themselves. This tribe cared about each other. Why should you care? Because this is your ancestor. His DNA is in you. These were the pre-humans who created humanity as we know it today. So when you care, that's not a bug. That's what it means to be human. When we collectively build things like the Sustainable Development Goals, like regenerative capitalism, like social movements, this is what it means to be human. The neoliberals are wrong. Their science is wrong. So 4 of us got together and took a crack at trying to pull all these threads together in this book, A Finer Future, creating an economy in service to life. Stuart Wallace, who ran New Economics Foundation, Anders Wigman, Swedish parliamentarian, European parliamentarian, president of the Club of Rome for many years, John Fullerton. John was 18 years a banker on Wall Street who quit to create Capital Institute. John's paper, Regenerative Capitalism, is, I think, one of the most important papers ever written. This concept of regenerative capitalism is the alternative to neoliberalism. And John points out natural systems are sustainable because they are regenerative. John says, here's today's world. We, people, the planet, are in service to the economy, which is in service to finance. We're very good at flowing money to the top. What's wrong with this picture? It's wrong way round. Finance is a tool to bring money, liquidity to the real economy, which has to be in service to life. So this term regenerative is now popping up everywhere. It was first used, if you believe the translations, in the Bible. It is literally a new birth, the coming of spring. Bucky Fuller was the first to use it in a term as we would. where he talked about moving away from extractive to regenerative. Bucky said this is the operating principle of the universe. He also said you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. Build a new model and make the old way obsolete. So this is what a number of us are now trying to do, is explain what we mean by this concept of regenerative. Moving away from the extractive, degenerative world in which we now find ourselves, where value is measured by money, and you come up through what's been called green, through what's been called sustainable and the Sustainable Development Goals. I had a hand in building those things. Are they perfect? No. Are they a good start? Yeah. But we need to move beyond that to a world that is truly regenerative. This is John's framing of what this arc of transition away from degenerative to regenerative would look like. He defines it as applying nature's laws and patterns of systemic health and self-organization, self-renewal, and regenerative vitality to socioeconomic systems. He laid out 8 principles, and I don't have time to go through all of them, but I'm happy to, or to go through them in great detail. I'm happy to talk about them in the questions. The one criticism that you might legitimately lay at John is that what he did was pull together the work of a lot of other people. So in-right relationship is the Buddhist concept, as Dr. Peter Brown put it forth. It's also the ecological economics concept, as Dr. Robert Costanza has put it forth. Holistic wealth. Money is useful. Money is not wealth. Wealth is well-being. It's belonging. It's being part of a community. A lot of people have talked about this. Innovative and adaptive. Humans are entrepreneurial. We begin again. Empowered participation. This is Francis Moore Lepay's concept of economic democracy. Edge effect abundance. This is Janine Benyus's biomimetic principle that in nature, the most abundant ecosystems are where several come together. Why? Because you have diversity. Robust circulation. This is the circular economy, Walter Stahel's concept. A lot of people say it's Bill McDonough's. Bill stole it from Walter. Seeks balance. This owes back to many native traditions of life in harmony. Honors community and place. You can have a vibrant global industrial economy if, and only if, every place within it has its own integrity. Self-reliance, community capacity to make decisions, to create lives that we want to live. This is critically important. Now, John points out none of these 8 principles is dominant. They all work together. And kindly, when you show graphics of it, use John's graphics. He put a lot of time into getting it right. If you want a Cliff Notes version, we wrote a paper in Fast Company, or you can get the book A Finer Future, where, again, we did a Cliff Notes version of what is a regenerative economy. But I highly recommend you actually sit down and read John's paper. He put a lot of time, 6 years of research, into writing that paper. When he first gave it to me, he said, it's not very good. Because he had released it to a group of economists, I know what happened. They all looked at it and went, uh-oh, this is better than anything we've got. And so they trashed it. I read it on a flight to Germany and wrote John from 39,000 feet and said, John, wow. In 45 years of doing this work, this is the best I have found. Yeah, I could quibble with that, or we can discuss that, but full stop. This is the best that I have found. So if you want to see the future of economics, of business, of how humans interact with this world, read John's paper. I mentioned edge effect abundance, mentioned the circular economy. These are just 2 of the principles. They are critical, though, to getting our economics right. Anders laid out for Europe the numbers of the circular economy and why doing a circular economy is one of the best solutions to the climate crisis. It's also one of the best ways of creating jobs. The science fiction writer William Gibson said, "The future is already here. It's just not widely distributed yet. We have all the technologies we need to solve the problems facing humanity. If you combine renewable energy and regenerative agriculture, you will solve the climate crisis." Carbon Tracker out of the UK. We are nearing peak fossil use. China is just about to hit peak fossil use. Yeah, at this point, fossil use is still going up, in part because the nations of the world the use of fossil energy to the tune of $7.2 trillion a year. That's your and my tax dollars subsidizing what's killing the climate. It's what, $13 million a minute. But Carbon Tracker says this is about to stop. Why? Because renewable energy is cheaper. When the Kentucky Coal Museum puts solar panels on their roof because it's cheaper than hooking to the coal-fired electric grid at their doorstep, you know it's over. Couple that with nature-based solutions, using grazing animals to take carbon out of the air and put it back in the soil. We can remove the excess carbon from the atmosphere more cost effectively than doing industrial agriculture. How do I know this? The work of Dr. Greg Retallack points out that 60 million years ago, the Earth was at 1,000 parts per million concentration of CO2. We're now at 424. Around 30 million years ago, there evolved these little grazing animals, free horses, that nibbled the grass at the edge of the forests. Yeah, at 1,000 parts per million, the Earth is carpeted in forests, which is to say, planting trees is not the answer. Grazing and grazing animals is the answer. When an animal nibbles grass, the roots slough polysaccharides, sugars, carbon, that feeds the microbiological community in the soil, which mineralizes the carbon, which is why Ukraine is so fertile. Well, was until we strewed landmines all over it. It's why the Great Plains of the United States had 3 meters of thick black soil. That black is carbon. It got there because of the grazing animals, the bison. We can do this again. If we manage herds of animals in the way in which nature does, dense packed, always moving, we can build economic systems based on this. This is Helmi Aboulesh, who runs Sechem, the only company ever to win the Right Livelihood Award. They have made a paradise in the Egyptian desert using organic biodynamic farming and grazing. So we helped Helmi create a carbon market, bringing money to these poor Egyptian farmers to pay them for the ecosystem services they are delivering to all of us by taking carbon from the air and putting it into the soil. It's also building the Egyptian economy. There are companies that are doing this. DNVGL was the first company to pledge to become a regenerative company. They said, we need a new narrative for the economy, the purpose of the economy and the corporation. A new purpose of humanity, creating and communicating these positive stories of change. The EU is beginning to get its act together, realizing that it needs to be investing in these new technologies. Now, the EU of late has been doing some very stupid things by saying, well, we just need to get rid of grazing animals. You do that, you lose the ability to solve the climate crisis. When you invest in renewable energy, you create jobs. These are much more labor intensive, less capital intensive than building nuclear power plants or any fossil plant. Occam Steiner, Pavam Sukhdev have shown that do we want jobs for people? It's the green economy. We're an interesting species. We have incredible power to transform the world around us, but we have this odd tendency to make a story and forget that we made the story. We begin to say, oh, that's reality. Capitalism is not natural laws. It's a story. It's our creation. If we don't like what it's doing to us, let's recreate it. So people like Kate Rayworth with donut economics, pointing out that we have to live below the planetary boundaries, but above the human foundation, so that all of us have dignity. We can create a world that works for 100% of humanity. If we do this, we will unleash the greatest prosperity humanity has ever known. It will, however, require new stories, new visions. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be happy? What do we want? When we do this, we can recreate our economic systems, build an economy in service to life. My old boss, David Brower, founder of Friends of the Earth, said, what do we want the Earth to be like 50 years from now? Let's do a little dreaming. Aim high, he said. Navigators have aimed at the stars for centuries. They haven't hit one yet, but because they aimed high, they found their way. Thank you.
Thank you, Hunter. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you in the hands of Antoinette, who's going to lead us through the Q&A. So Antoinette, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also want to thank you, and I hope Swiss politicians listen to it. So I'm going to send this out as well.
Same goes for the Dutch one.
Exactly. But before we start our question, I would like to introduce our inquiry framework. And here I just want to start that based on Find a Future, there is a big sense of urgency, and you brought that again here very clearly. So if you follow the Club of Rome logic, we are still in the business as usual scenario, which might bring us close to collapse, if I understood that correctly. Resources overstretched, societies in unrest and division. And now we learned with you that we can buy time with a comprehensive technology solution, but also what I find really fascinating is not only the higher resource efficiency, but also regenerative farming. But whilst we are buying time, we can also ask, and you ask that question, what is the future that we want? Is preventing collapse enough? And this is what we seek to do with our inquiry framework. We will ask how desirable is the model? What is the new narrative we should strive for, the values, the ideals it rests on? How feasible is it? What would governments and policymakers have to change? And finally, what would people choose? Would they choose it? Would they incur voluntarily some of the burdens and new responsibilities to do so? And in order to get us there, we start with our future leader, with Silvio, who hopefully has the most hopeful question. We will see.
Thank you, Antoinette. I don't know. Let's see. Let's imagine I would like to turn to the dark side or fall for the old story, as you told, as you called it before, and become an investment banker. What would you tell me or other young people if they have this goal in life?
I spend a lot of time with young people. I teach business. I teach at Fordham University. And many of the students in the Gabelli School at Fordham are aiming at going to Wall Street, aiming at being investors. And I ask them, have they thought much about risk management? In what industries are they proposing to invest? And what is the risk to those industries of unchecked climate change, of social collapse, of the litany of challenges, the drivers of change that are facing us, have they factored that in? Increasingly, for example, the insurance industry is realizing that vast tracts of land are uninsurable. Are you near a coastline? If the Thwaites Glacier lets go, you're going to have at least a meter of sea level rise. If the ice dam behind the Thwaites Glacier comes as well, you're going to have multiple meters of sea level rise. There goes every coastal city. Start naming the big cities in the world. Most of them are on the coasts. So Shanghai, Tokyo, Mumbai, London, New York, San Francisco.
Amsterdam.
You begin to look at the world economy and realize it's going to be underwater. So what investments are going to grow in this new world? If solar is, as Credit Suisse, when there was a Credit Suisse, said by 2025, will be 1 cent per kilowatt hour. Do you want to be investing in that, or do you want to be investing in new nukes at 20 cents a kilowatt hour? Just do the math. If China is peaking in fossil fuel use, half the cars now sold in China are electric vehicles. Do you want to be investing in old Ford Motor Company, or do you want to be investing in the in BYD or the Chinese companies that are investing in electric cars? Just do risk management. And again, notice I have put no value forward here aside from you want to make a lot of money. You can make these arguments purely on economics. This is an approach we call the integrated bottom line. You've heard the phrase, the triple bottom line. Profit, sure, but then people and planet. And John Elkington's argument was businesses should keep 3 sets of books. You're right, they're not gonna. When things get tough, what matters? Profit. Okay, if I can show you that behaving responsibly to people and planet is simply more profitable, now you start baking it into how you do business. So if you use resources more efficiently, as Antoinette said, the part of the circular economy, that cuts your costs. If solar is cheaper and you're putting solar on your roof, as opposed to buying, 25 cent a kilowatt hour electricity from the coal-fired utility, it's cheaper. How do you attract and retain the best talent? In today's economy, talent is what will matter for a company. Young people want to work for a clean company. They don't want to work for the dirty guys. So if you as a company have a commitment to behaving responsibly, you're going to get the best applicants. Once you have them, says Economist Intelligence Unit, enabling your workers to implement more regenerative practices as part of their day job is what engages the workforce. Says Gallup, an engaged workforce will give you 24% higher productivity, 21% higher profitability than a similar industry with a disengaged workforce. Risk management. If you are cutting your risks, you're cutting your insurance costs. Marketing, brand differentiation. By showing that you have a more responsible product, you're going to get the customers who want that kind of a world for themselves, for their children. In food, regeneratively grown food has higher nutrient density. If what you want is health, eating organic, regenerative will get you healthier. You start walking through, we've counted 13 different reasons why behaving responsibly to people and planet is just better business. No polar bears required.
I love
Thank
this.
you,
I love
thank you,
this.
Ante. I
And
will try to
think-
keep that in mind while investing.
And I guess that's something we are going to dig deeper also later, because I'm just thinking about Glencore in Switzerland, who went down the bad path again. But anyway, you know all these stories. I want to give over to Otti because he wants to start asking about the values behind the model.
Yeah, and I loved your presentation. Thank you again. I thought it's very powerful and very inspiring. I think the challenge is on the value side, and it's already starting here a little bit with your reply to Silvio. Is it a more for less message? When I read your Natural Capitalism book and your Factor 4 book, I was immensely impressed about the efficiency that we can gather, the technology innovation that is available. But frankly, as a business person, that was not always available, or that was not always working as well as we wanted. So we still had to make very tough decisions between, let's say, firing people, increasing profitability for the shareholders, as you said earlier, or investing in new technology, which might only come in stream in a few years. And by the way, we also saw that customers are not always willing to pay more for more ethical products. I mean, SUVs was the largest single new car sales segment until mid last year. So again, I think there's a problem if this is only about doing well, doing good and doing well at the same time. What if we cannot have our cake and eat it? What is the responsibility of people then? And how do you sell the message when these benefits that you envisage are not coming in so nicely?
The benefits that we envision are slower to come in than it ought to be, in part because of subsidies. If you believe in free markets, I am a free marketeer. Let's get rid of all subsidies. Don't subsidize solar, and don't subsidize fossil. If you get rid of the $7.2 trillion a year going into fossil, SUVs will go away in one hell of a hurry, because you can't afford to drive them. I drive a Leaf, little electric car. My husband called it the hippie car, until he discovered that it's faster off the line than a Porsche, a Mustang, a BMW. You can go get the various videos that Elon Musk put up of his Teslas beating Maseratis and Lamborghinis. I've never taken on one of those, but I imagine my Leaf would beat them. It's a better handling car. Now, many of the early green technologies were funky. People thought they could sell it simply on the green logic. No, you have to do good engineering. You have to have a product that is as good in the market as the conventional one. But again, as I said with regeneratively grown food, Dr. David Montgomery's new study showing much higher nutrient density from regenerative meat, from regenerative vegetables, regenerative fruit, regenerative grains. This is just better for you.
So in a nutshell, what you're saying, Hunter, sorry for being interrupted, but you're saying we must level the playing field and let the better one win. And actually, that's going to be the regenerative, restorative type of technologies that we have, right? That's, I think, your message.
That's a good piece of my message. Now, we can talk about values. I get a little mincy when we get on to religion or personal values, because everybody has their own.
Exactly.
And I think we're on much solider ground when we're simply talking about do the math. Let's do the economics. Which of these technologies will deliver you what you want? Cheapest, fastest, best.
Exactly. But here
then we have real measurements. Now, if you want to talk about values, what we have now is 1/3 of a billion people around the world starving to death. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, we have 40% of people on $2 or less a day, right? That's.
Are you okay with that? The neoliberal world gave us the inequalities, which Dr. Peter Turchin and indeed Thomas Piketty in his book Capital in the 21st Century pointed out that that kind of pervasive inequality is causative of economic collapse. Is that what you want? That's what we're headed for. You really want to put yourself in a bad mood, go Google near-term human extinction. I mean, don't do this because it'll put you in a bad mood. There are people purporting to have science showing that humans go extinct within the next couple decades.
But I want to make one final question on this. Values, that's a very problematic topic. We cannot shortcut that by saying nature has laws or patterns. That is good for biomimicry. That's not so good for how people vote and how we create political systems where everybody should have a say in deciding, as exactly like you pointed out at the end, what future do we want? And that's a political process, and that's not easy. And very often people might not vote for what we want them to vote. But I want to challenge you or give you a little final question on the point you just made on inequality, because you're basing the book, or you and your co-authors based the book on the Handy study, which is a very simple growth model, which basically shows that if there's too much inequality because there's a stratified society and the elites are eating all the food, there will be famine, and then societies collapse. Now, that's not really a moral argument for inequality. That's kind of a self-sufficiency, let's not die because of hunger argument. Then in the rest of the book, you're going much deeper into, actually, we need a lot more social equity, social equality, and social justice. So what is your thinking here in terms of what is the sufficient degree of equality or social justice that you're envisaging, and how does that link to your story about better technologies and better profits at the end?
You make a good point that much of my work is, if you will, values free, and I try to keep it that way. Stuart Wallace was much more explicit, and in his section of the book, talking about values and a need for new values.
Exactly.
He was much more explicit that inequality is immoral. And the Mandela quote that I put forth puts the same thing. I look at it more from a stacked argument. If I can show you 10 different reasons why having inequality is bad, I almost don't care which one of those arguments you pick. Whichever one works for you, it's just plain bad. There are very few arguments that inequality is good, whether from a moral standpoint or a mathematical standpoint. I tend to look most these days at the increasing plausibility of total system collapse, and more at the rise among young people of despair, of a sense of we're not going to make it.
Yeah.
Young people saying, I'm not going to have children. I don't want to bring children into this kind of a world. To me, that is stark. And if I can show them you can bring children in and we can fix this world, then that's the better argument to run on.
And I think here we totally agree, frankly.
Frank
Hunter,
raised the question of why are we talking about cars and not mobility? Excellent point. And where I live, my mobility choices are I can ride my horse, I can ride a bicycle, or I can take a car. And if I want to go grocery shopping, it's going to be a car. But I'm going to have it be an electric car, charged off the solar panels that are right outside, run on batteries that are in my garage. So when power goes out, I live in a rural area. There are no mobility choices. For people in cities, though, cars are stupid. Why would you ever own a car? You have to pay to park it. You drive through. Mobility is a much better answer. And so these kinds of questions of what are all of the technology ranges, and then which one works best for you. I'm not going to tell you which works best for you, but I will tell you that you have choice.
Yeah. And we even had some people asking, why are we not going towards mobility rather than cars? So I think the audience gets it. So I think that's
good point.
Hopeful. We have still a lot of questions. I pick one, I believe, brings together two aspects from Peter, because he asks, I hear and read and understand, and I also believe that we do have to have a transition at a high pace and a high scale. So what is the to-do list? What if you could write down the policies for the governments, you had the free choice, what would you say now, the next 5 things you have to do really?
I think the most serious problem facing us is climate change. The two answers to climate change are stop the use of fossil fuels. So stop emitting by switching to energy efficiency and to renewable energy.
Mhm.
Given that I don't believe we are going to get rid of subsidies, then let's at least have commensurate subsidies for the technologies that will give us the kind of world that we want. So enable people to rapidly shift to things like heat pumps. I argued for years with my husband, we should get a heat pump. He said, it's expensive. Yeah, it's expensive. We should get a heat pump. It's expensive. Finally, I said, God damn it, we're getting a heat pump. And we did. What he hadn't realized is heat pumps also keep you cool. It's been getting increasingly hot. We never used to need air conditioning. This summer he said, you know, that person who kept saying that we shouldn't get a heat pump was really wrong. Why did you do that? Like, yeah, he loves the heat pump. Europe should simply pay for everybody in Europe to have a heat pump if what you want to do is get off Russian gas. Similarly, in the United States, just start paying people to install these things.
And they
The
do
more
something
you do
similar
this,
in
the more
Germany
jobs
right
you
now,
create.
Hunter. They do
Do
something
what?
similar in Germany right now. They give you quite a lot of subsidies, but people are shouting out, "Oh, why do I have to have heat pumps now?" So I mean, yeah, I have it with you, and it's great that you say that, but it's so hard.
But Antoinette, the shouting was, why do I have to pay for the heat pump?
A
So
bit,
it was
a
again
bit,
about,
a
oh my
bit.
God, it's actually going to cost me money, right?
Yeah, okay. And you were saying finance it, so I take that.
Just
Yeah.
start shifting the subsidies away from what we don't want into what we do want. Do it as rapidly as we can. And at the same time, the solution to climate change is not going to come from the governments. It's going to come from people in communities realizing that the nations of the world are going to keep going off to these conference of parties and doing nothing. So let's take it into our own hands. What can we do in our own home, in our own community, with our neighbors? Nothing is too small. Just do one thing. Every day, look at yourself in the mirror and say, what's my dot? Do one thing every day with someone else in your community. And as we start doing this as individuals, as groups of people, we will realize that we have the agency, we have the power. We can start making these decisions for our own communities.
Yeah, it's almost like famous last words, but I know that Kees has one question he was waiting to ask you. So let's have that. Bring it on, Kees.
Well, yeah, it's a very obvious question, but I think it's really important to ask. So how do we keep capitalism from becoming capitalism? Because I think it's quite important, because what you said, if we can get the markets working as the way that they should do, like really working, it makes perfect sense. But how the fuck do we get that done?
Understand what capitalism is. Capital is an asset you can deploy to create greater wealth and well-being. We have allowed capitalism to be defined as money and stuff. Nothing wrong with money and stuff, but that's only half of the equation. There is also natural capital and human capital. Natural capital is not just board feet of timber. It is the services that intact ecosystems give to our economy. This is the work of Pavan Sukhdev and Teeb, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, where they calculate that the value given to the economy from intact ecosystems is greater than the economic value of the money and stuff. And human capital is not just exploitable workforce, it's intact community. It is transmission of adaptive values through generations. A good capitalist seeks to steward, to enhance all forms of capital. So what we're doing is what Randy Hayes called cheater capitalism. We're focusing only on the money and stuff. we're being bad capitalists. So helping people to understand that logic first. And then again, helping people understand that businesses that behave responsibly to people and planet will make more money, will have lower costs, will have all of the advantages of the integrated bottom line. And in a sense, this is going to get easier and easier. Your number of the day, climate change is a stern change agent. It's not going to be hard very much longer to argue whether or not climate change is real. And to argue that we need to do something about it. We're in a horse race with catastrophe. And as more and more people see this, they're going to start saying, what do we do? So Frank asked, wage inequality. How do we get more wage equality? We demand it politically. We get politically active. There's a guy who had a company called Gravity. And he was the CEO. He was paid a lot of money. His workers were paid considerably less. He said, I'm not going to do this anymore. Everybody in the company is going to get paid $70,000 a year, including me. And everybody said, oh, that will fail. It hasn't. His company is growing by leaps and bounds. His workers are totally, lots of people want to work there. Check it out, little company called Gravity. They're doing very well, thank you. So this can be done individually by a CEO. In my organization, I'm frequently paid the lowest. I make sure that my people are paid a living wage before I get paid. It's just my choice of I am committed to wage equality.
Okay, that's I guess, Case, you are satisfied. It was a great.
I can work with this. I can work.
I know that we stretch your time already, Hunter, but could I have one last question?
Certainly.
Because you bring in all this experience, and hence I really would like to know, what are the key lessons you learned on the way, what you're doing?
Gosh, there are a lot. Ensure that the people in a situation, ensure that the people who need to look good for the outcome to happen look good. It's not about me. It's about them. And if I make sure that I get on television, I get in the newspaper, I get an article written about me, things are not going to happen as fast as if I make sure they get on television, they get an article written about them, they get praised, they get the reward. Make your team look good, and you will look good. Hire people who are smarter than you are. Yeah, they will make you look bad. They will make the organization sing. Believe in love. This was the lesson from Dana Meadows, the lead author of the book Limits to Growth. In Limits, her co-authors would never let her talk about love. But shortly before she died, she started talking about love. That what we really are creating is an economy based on love. And I mentioned Helmi Abulesh of Sekem. Check it out, Sekem, S-E-K-E-M, fabulous company, transforming the world. And somebody asked Helmi, what do you do with somebody who's difficult? He said, I love them more.
Yeah, I love that, and it reminds me of a discussion I sometimes have with certain people. But anyway, so...
those who shall not be named at this very moment in time. No, I think, Hunter, can I just say, I mean, we were looking really forward to meeting you, because you don't know it, but Case has been warming us up for months and saying, we're talking to all these academics, and here finally comes a lady who is a real pragmatic, practical person who gets shit done. And I think you have not disappointed at all. And again, I love the conversation and sharing some of your insights. The DOT acronym is going to stay with us. We're going to test it at the end of the show today. So I just want to thank you very, very much for all your efforts, for what you're doing, for the time you spend as us, and for all the energy you're continuing to put in to make this world a little bit finer, using the word of the title of your book. Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. And I think, again, the many questions and engagement on the chat just shows how much what you're saying is resonating with everybody. So
yeah, I'd be
thanks.
happy to chat with anybody who still has a question. Somebody asked, what's the purpose of my life? To make a difference.
Oh.
Very good. So, I mean, please stay and engage on chat if you still have a few minutes.
I've got time.
I will kind of go to the next part, and then maybe if you're still around, we'll bring you back in for a comment. So let's go into the second part of the call, the Transformation Lab. And as always, we're going to start the conversation here in trying to make sense of the regenerative paradigm in comparison to some of the others. And as you remember, this is our starting point. As Hunter was pointing out, capitalism as it's in the textbook. So a flow of goods and services on the one hand, of money and of credit on the other side, in the financials, and then the creation of the basic structures through government in regards to embedding the market in society. And of course, as what we're highlighting here in the last few sessions is really the interface to nature on the bottom left, on the one hand, extraction, pollution, but also, and Hunter went there also at the end again with, what does it mean for humanity? Who are we? Where do we want to be? So the second slide, you already know this one as well. These are the crises of capitalism as identified by the 99% economy. And you can see both the direct impacts and the indirect impacts. Environmental degradation is what we talked a lot about today. But you remember when we talked to Helena, we also talked a lot about ruthless globalization. With Christian Felber, we talked about the decline in public goods and erosion of democracy. And certainly when you go to John's chapters, you see a lot about financial instability and the problem with banking. So what are the key things that we've heard about today? This is a preliminary assessment, and we will see a lot more from that in a second when we go to institutions, and Antoinette is going to present the details. But for us, what stood out from the regenerative approach as described in the Finer Future was really the focus on what was previously called natural capitalism. So the combination of the highest productivity of resources, including regenerative agriculture, technological innovation, including what was called biomimicry, so better ways to produce your products in creating higher efficiencies, incentives from the state to ensure both reuse and resource efficiency, and then a move towards, as people said, from buying a car to mobility as a service, so this kind of circular flow economy. Those were the key parts of what we saw really important and quite idiosyncratic, quite special in this approach. And then there are some other things which we might have already encountered in some of the other paradigms, from banking reforms to taxation. Antoinette is going to talk about this a little more. Integrated bottom line, as Hunter pointed out, and also some view on worker cooperatives and so on. So now with this in mind, let's go into the details. I will pick up the ideology and the values as always. Antoinette is going to take institutions, and then we're going to have a combination of change strategy analysis and reality check. Where are we actually going? And you heard some of this again from Hunter already, that Case is going to lead us into it. Then we're going to have plenary again, and if Hunter's still here, I'm sure we're going to have some thoughts from her on all of this. So let me introduce the ideals. As always, we are, for the purpose of the sense making here, we're defining 6 different ideologies, and we're focusing mostly on 5 of them, between conservatism, libertarianism, which is classical liberalism, modern liberalism, communitarianism, and socialism. And we've discussed about these. There's materials on the website, so I'm not going to go into the definition of these paradigms anymore, but I'm going to try to make sense of what is in the book. And I think you heard it a little bit from Hunter already. My perspective was that we actually have 3 different narratives that come together. One is about circularity, which is a mostly technical, and I think Hunter said a mostly value neutral paradigm, which is about how do we gain the greatest output from the inputs, from the resources, from the limited resources that we have, but also how do we regenerate them? So if you remember the butterfly circularity chart, there is a restoration and a regeneration cycle on both sides of that picture. It's combined with what I would call a sustainability narrative. So using the markets, but whilst making profit in a more responsible fashion, using things like triple bottom line, John Aitkerson's, or indeed the integrated, I think it was called integrated bottom line in Hunter's proposal. And then the third aspect is, I've called it deep ecology here, but I'm not entirely certain yet what to call this. It's a more spiritual, nature-centric ideology, which really values nature as a value in itself. And we had exactly the same conversation with Robert Costanza, where he said, actually, in environmental economics, we have two things. We have the engineers and the economists, and then we have the activists that come from the environmental part. And very often they are pushing for biodiversity or nature as something that is valuable in itself, not in support of life as the life support system, not just as an ecosystem services that suits us in terms of production, but something that has a value in itself. And I think here is the difficult part sometimes in disentangling what exactly the value system is behind that, what ethics are being pushed forward, and what does that mean? And then just finally, to just highlight a few things here. So I do believe the differences in these three paradigms are, one, in the dominant system view, the gray bubbles. The sustainability is clearly a market system. The circularity is mainly about production and technology, a closed loop optimization of the resource flows. And the ecology is mostly, no surprise there, an ecological system. And you hear things like natural patterns or natural laws and things like that. The key goals, as already pointed out, efficiency in the circularity, triple bottom line integration of profit with sustainability in the yellow paradigm, and then this kind of well-being, which very often has a natural kind of nature well-being overlay. So we're talking social well-being, but in reality, it's a specific type of social individual we have in mind, someone who is really loving nature and embedded with nature and living in a self-sustained local community, etc. Where I think we find common ground that is very fruitful are the green bubbles, so the notion of circular economy, which combines circularity with the sustainability narrative, resource regeneration, which combines circularity with the ecology narrative, and I think the life support system, that is the minimum concept that the ecologists and the sustainability people do agree on. And at the heart of this, again, I would like to put something like Robert Costanza's ecosystem services, which as a minimum translates the concept of natural resources into a value for economics. We cannot continue to look at nature as valueless or value-free. We need to look at the wider circle of what we're going to do with natural resources. And the final point that is going to come up in Kees's suggestion, if you look at the scenarios of the Club of Rome, Antoinette already mentioned, we've got BAU, BAU2, CT, the technical scenario, and this W, the value scenario. My suggestion is that the left side is closer to the technical scenario. The right side is closer to the question Hunter asked, what life do we want? What kind of planet do we want? It's a value scenario that we need to disentangle. And here, what I found interesting in the way that it was described in the book, it was a very strong focus on narrative. Kees is always saying that we need a better story. So I'm suggesting there's something about winning a story war, which is interesting and important. And if I can just ask you to have a look at that diagram, which is the typical diagram for the regenerative frame, which is normally kind of red on the left and green on the right. So it's going from conventional to regenerative. What I found very interesting is that green is part of the bad guys. When I grew up, green was on the good side, so to speak. They were on the right side of history. In this diagram, green is between conventional and sustainable. What this, I think, means is that the green paradigm has already been hegemonized, has already been incorporated through greenwashing and so on by traditional conventional capitalism. So green is not good anymore because it has already been abused, if you want. So to a degree, I think what we're seeing with regenerative is the attempt to create a new concept, a new story, to regain the high ground and the dialogue, the discourse share, the discourse battle, so to speak, in regards to a more value-oriented paradigm that we should seek. And here again,
Adi,
I
you're
think
making this normative. It isn't
Exactly.
good and bad. It's an arc toward where it is we need to get to. All of it is essential.
Exactly. And the only thing that I would say, which goes back to the conversation we had on values, is the axis in the middle, the y-axis, is more or less. It's a how axis. That's the technical axis. And I think there's very little discussion to be had, as Hunter pointed out. The x-axis, in reality, needs to face the political and the ethical question about what do we want? And that's a question of, even if we could produce something with the highest energy efficiency, think about a nuclear bomb or cigarettes, even if we could make it really energy efficient, should we produce that stuff? And probably the answer will be no for many people who sit on the right side of this graph. But this is a political discussion that we cannot just, in my personal opinion, put under the carpet by just saying, here's a natural law or natural way of doing things. No, we need to have that conversation out and we need to discuss it in a political sphere. And with that, that's my sense making on the value side here, hopefully somewhat useful. And can I hand over to you, Antoinette, for the institutions?
Yes, of course. And we are going through the same procedure. We're just looking first at our general model, and then I'm going to take it to regenerative economics and do some deep dives. So if we just look at this framework, then you can see this is an institutional political framework. That's how we look at institutions. And that means while economic activity in the middle, provisioning is often mediated through markets. These are enabled, regulated, crafted, and constructed in the public sphere. So we have to distinguish various actors here, most prominently the state, and various policies which interact with the values we just discussed. So if you want to understand more of that, go to our website, because I now try to take it to regenerative economy. And ask what concrete institutions is here brought to the fore. And I can tell you a lot, so there's a lot of ideas in this book, but we were also discussing quite where would we place it. Now, I have landed on where I see it mostly is that this is all geared towards to enable natural capitalism, which still is mainly a better form of capitalism as we heard it. So capital was also differently defined. And hence we situated the framework close to the mixed economy. So most policies you find in yellow and orange are directed towards resource efficiency then logically and towards enabling the circular economy. So in the yellow one, we see that market failures such as unaccounted externalities are corrected and internalized by new accounting standards or the integrated bottom line as we heard, and of course by such things as carbon pricing. Then if we go further, most regulations are directed towards behavior change of economic agents. So for instance, as we will hear in a second, through a new circular taxation system or through different design and product standards and incentives for restorative and regenerative practices. And then when the state acts as an entrepreneur, then this is all about new technology research which has to be financed, or new markets such as the one for secondary materials, which has to be crafted by the state. Great emphasis is, or I could also say hope, is placed into civil companies and entrepreneurs, here, that's the green one, who adapt voluntarily to the circular economy because it's good business, as we heard, and form alliances, hopefully, as business for the regenerative economy. And finally, what comes across very clearly, the finance industry is regarded as highly problematic. So here we are closest to almost a command economy. I say almost as a little bit stretched, but we have far-reaching changes which are set to have to take place. For instance, breaking up of big banks or new reserve requirements, which essentially would turn the finance sector upside down. Again, that's something that Swiss people might want to read in a little bit more carefully because it would change quite a lot on the Swiss landscape. Now, I want to do two deep dives. First of all, I want to tease out again a little bit more natural capitalism so that you also understand the taxation I'm later talking about. So again, regenerative economics, and we heard that several times already, is very much focused on resource efficiency And this here means essentially that you have to close the loops, that you have to turn to the principles of natural capital optimization. And what does this mean? And here you can see on the left side the infamous value chain of Porter, and then we can see on the right side how that would look differently if we adopted a natural capitalism view. Well, first of all, it's on resource productivity, which can be radically shifted to much more efficient production processes. And they say that you can stretch the natural resources we have now by a factor of 10 to 100, so that they can carry us much wider, buying time. Then it's a lot about imitate biological production models, so nothing goes to waste. Compost or recycle what used to be waste, another very important point. Change the business model. So we were talking about the automotive strategies of the automotive sector, which wouldn't be selling cars, but enabling mobility. So it's about renting and after services. And finally, the last one is to restore, sustain, expand your natural habitat and resource base. And here I really also want to encourage again, read Hunter's book on regenerative agriculture. I found that highly fascinating. So just to bring you still on board, what would it mean, alliances for regenerative economy? What would we want to see with companies? And in order to make that happen, there's quite a focus also on taxation, which we will see in the next slide. So the change of the taxation system is really core, or to put it into Hunter's words, I really like that, taxes are best applied to items that society does not want to discourage them. So that's really a different way to look at taxes, because of course at present we are taxing mainly income. So circular taxation in essence is all about behavior change. So you want to reduce waste and overconsumption through taxes, whilst encouraging reuse, repair, and product longevity through tax reliefs. And I give you just two examples to make that a little bit more concrete. Producers would be taxed for the proportion of virgin content in their products, but they would get a tax rebate for recycled content. And then to see that on the side of the consumers, they would also, I found the example quite nice about tires. So if you recycle or repair your tire, you will get a VAT relief. If you buy new tires, you would have to pay higher VAT. So just to give you the logic, and I bet that would be very effective in changing behaviors. And I think we heard that by Hunter already. So
and I think if I can come in here, the idea that, Antoinette, you're talking about, to really look at how taxation is structured, as you pointed out, we're discussing mostly about income tax versus capital gains tax, and nobody is really looking in sufficient detail, I think, at should we really tax income? Is that really the way to tax? And I think here the ideas that are being brought forward are extremely, extremely interesting. And I think maybe we should even talk to someone who's specialized on this and see where the blockers are. And one other point before handing over to Kees, I wanted to make on the previous slide, which Antoinette, you explained. I think one other thing that stood out for me was the fact that on the left, the Porter value chain, you really see that the scarce resources finance. Yeah. In the new circularity paradigm, the scarce resources, natural and human, as Hunter pointed out, but in this case, natural capital. So there's really a fundamental shift to consider what is most scarce, what do we need to optimize against, and therefore it becomes logical that the value chain doesn't take into account extraction and doesn't look at waste, which clearly becomes paramount if we're moving to that new way of looking at the world. And I thought that was very eye-opening. So thanks very much, Antoinette. Then I will hand over to Kees for the change and transformation analysis.
From an overall perspective, natural capitalism or regenerative economics is firmly criticizing neoliberalism, which, by the way, sometimes is also called late-stage capitalism. But what I find really interesting and also empowering is that it doesn't completely discount capitalism. And therefore, it suggests a very clear strategy based upon market-based reform with a clear emphasis on businesses and thus production. And in terms of effectiveness, I can see that there is a strong focus on the why, as we've heard Hunter also sharing with us, that our current modus operandi is fundamentally degenerative and destructive, making an ecological collapse a very, very real possibility. Yeah? So there is this sense of urgency. What I also like is that if we take as a theory of change, the focus on business is really interesting, and also I think very feasible, especially if you focus on energy, because energy, and we will dive a bit deeper into that also with the reality check, is, as we all know, the most impactful influencer of climate change in the ecological footprints, and it's also an element that is very suitable for business and innovation. So I think that's a very good potential marriage. And the who, therefore, is I think very, very clearly geared towards engineers and entrepreneurs, people that can actually make energy efficiency happening, people that can turn a potential societal issue into business innovation as an opportunity, which I think is a very interesting and positive, constructive way of moving forward. And therewith, I think there's a very clear path towards organizational and institutional change. When we look at the other side, to the practice of change, and also the execution of regenerative thinking and acting, or creating circular economies, we can see that if you, especially the focus on circular economy, and again, regenerative economics and circular economy are not the same, but just for argument's sake, if we put those in the same sphere, we can't deny that circular economy, circular economics is very much part of the mainstream debate in both politics and in business. If we look at initiatives like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Regen Network, Natural Capitalism. I can only speak about the Netherlands, but I'm absolutely sure same will go in the UK and in Switzerland and in the US. There is an abundance of initiatives about circular economy, circularity, that have substantial backup, both politically and for business. So I think the potential for mainstream attention and attentionability is there, but there is a but. I think that we have to acknowledge and recognize that there is an important gap between thinking and talking about circularity or regeneration or natural capitalism, and acting circular and regenerative or natural, which becomes very clear when we dive deeper into the reality check, what we will do in the upcoming slides with you. And we will focus, just for argument's sake, on the energy efficiency bit. Energy efficiency is without any doubt the lowest hanging fruit to create change, both in favor of climate change or ecological footprint reduction, but also in the sense of business, because as this slide shows you, there is a lot of room for improvement and innovational opportunities. So on the one hand, we can see that our deliverance on efficiency, energy efficiency, is really, really poor. There's lots of rooms for improvement. But what we can also see, that the business opportunities are very real. They offer real potential for GDP growth, and business opportunities like Hunter shared with us earlier, whether that be competitive advantage, consumer loyalty, etc., etc. It's real. But if we then look at the reality, the state of affairs, so not only at the opportunities that are out there, but the doing bit, so not thinking about it and talking about it, but the doing bit, then the picture is a lot less positive. So if we first look at the shift of renewable resources, are we really leaving fossil fuels behind and replacing them for renewable clean energy? Well, the short version is no, we're not. We are way behind on targets to make a real system change happening in that aspect. If we then look at carbon capturing, which can be another way, we can try to mitigate carbon by making sure that we get less CO2 out there, but on the other hand, we also have to capture carbon. And as again, the same picture there is a huge opportunity there, but we're not living up to that opportunities, not even close, way behind on the potential of it. If we then look one step further and we take a specific example for transportation, it has crossed the discussion earlier. We get a bit of the same picture. We can see that our means of transportation, if we take, for instance, the car there, it's highly inefficient. We can do a lot better, but are we actually doing it? Well, no, not really. We're making progress, but not nearly enough to really change the dynamics of transportation. If we then take food, agriculture and food, we get a bit of the same situation. It is a tremendous opportunity there is a tremendous opportunity for regenerative farming, for nature inclusive farming. We heard Hunter about it. The possibilities and the opportunities are abundant. But if we look at the current state of affairs, we see that the agriculture and food system is still very much dominated by intensive industrial food and agriculture. So again, lots of work to do. And then if we go last but not least to construction, another really important sector if it's about ecological footprint and or climate change, well, we basically see the same situation. There is an improvement. We are moving in the right direction. So we can see that we are moving in the right direction, but not nearly at the right speed to really fundamentally change the way that the sector works, to create a constructive, regenerative, natural capitalistic construction sector. So if we take all the sources of energy efficiency together, again, we just picked out a couple of them, but if we have a sort of an overall look towards the various sources out there, well, you can see, as this slide shows you, that there is very little green in the screen. Most of our efficiency efforts, energy efficiency efforts, are in orange or in red, which means that they not going far enough, or we're actually still very much in the shit I was earlier mentioning. Yeah? So again, the opportunity is there, it's real, but we're not living up to the opportunity. And then, last but not least, if we take into account that the collapse of the whole system is a real, tangible threat that is hanging above our heads. You heard Hunter saying and mentioning it a couple of times. So if you look at the work of the Club of Rome and the various scenarios out there, then we know that we really have to change our current trajectory in a very rapid way to avoid collapse. And if we then see that the opportunities that are out there that make business sense, that are economically sound, and the speed with which that isn't happening, or actually I should say it isn't happening, then there is much room for improvement. And we can actually see that there are two main blockages, two main barriers, and they are lying both in the political sphere and in the business sphere. And so we find, and this is something that Hunter elaborated on, which of course is part of the neoliberal system, capitalism, crony capitalism, whatever you want to call it. So we know that there is a big influence of governments or politics in the market sphere, but what we can also see is that also a lot of businesses are way behind, and that is interesting, but also a bit strange. If you've heard that there are real sensible business opportunities out there. So the question I want to leave you with is, as we know that business is a huge influencer of both politics as well as public opinion, as well as consumer markets, how can we make sure that businesses become leaders of this change, rather than parties that are withholding the change? And so we have to make sure that business is not part of the problem, but part of the solution. It makes sense. It makes sense in all the right ways. It's good for society, but it's also good for the shareholders. So I want to leave you with that question, and I hope we can have a discussion or share some thoughts about this. What do you think is necessary to make businesses, CEOs, managements take a constructive leading role into reforming the capitalist system as we know it?
Kees, thank you very much. And here we will get you to vote, because as usual, you can vote which of the 6 paradigms I think we've had so far, which you like best. And again, please continue to use the chat. What wonderful comments. What a great community this already is. Whilst I describe them, which of the paradigms at this point of our journey resonates most with you? Please put it on the chat. You remember we had Alex Edmonds with Pieconomics, very focused on financial services. Mindset change is all that is required. Well-being economics, we had Helena here to talk about a need to go back towards, sorry, no, this was Robert Costanza. We talked about sustainable human well-being as the end game. We talked about environmental services, the genuine progress indicator, and a need to address both human well-being and ecological health together. We had today's narrative about regenerative, which Antoinette put into the orange kind of middle, but you've seen there was a bit of red in banking and a bit of yellow in the capitalist kind of profit-centric narrative. So you've heard that. Happiness economics was Helena, mostly local initiatives, diversified agriculture, community resilience, anti-globalization, go back to local. And then the ECG with Christian Felber, which was some time ago, the economy for common good. It was centered on the common goods matrix, a substantive change to the way that democratic participation works, a lot of changes to make businesses follow the common goods logic. And I think it was clear in his book that his view was that businesses that do not follow the logic, they will die. So a very strict kind of, very strong, let's rather say, value-driven narrative. which one is the one that you like best at this point of the journey? If any. Costanza, Case is sticking with Costanza.
Yep.
David is saying regenerative. Walter, well-being. So 2 for well-being, 3 for well-being, 2 for regenerative. Regenerative, well-being, and regenerative are tie, says Val. ECG, Andre, and regenerative. Okay, so it seems we are mostly in the orange part there. So not entirely on the green. So local is not necessarily the anti-globalization narrative is not so strongly resonating with us. We like this kind of combination of social and economic. And the regenerative, I think for us, very strongly resonates, at least at the technology side. So please, my invitation to all of you is make use of the resources on the website with the growing kind of summaries and so on, so that at the end of the series, you have a point of view. Because as Marcello pointed out, you need to lead this thing. We all need to lead this thing. So we need to understand where we stand and then turn it into action. So please look at the details and make sure that you can defend whatever you end up with. And with that, I would like to briefly hand over to Kees and just tell us what is coming next.
Yes, October 8th, we invite Julie Nelson in our midst. Well, I can promise you again, this will be a fascinating episode again. To make a long story short, Julie Nelson dived into the mechanics of economics, and she basically makes an appeal to not see the economy as a machine, but as a living heart. She actually uses the metaphor of a human heart for our economy, and although it might sound rather naive and maybe even superficial, it is fundamental. So I'm really looking forward to talk about this with her. How does an economy look like if we take humans serious as humans rather than Homo economicus? Because that's basically her claim to fame. So please join us October 8th at 4 o'clock again for an intriguing session.
Wonderful. Feminist economics, here we come. We talked about love in economics, people cannot say. So hopefully Julie is gonna open that taboo. And with that, I would like to close. And if I can, I will make use of Hunter's invitation, the dot. If you can, if you have anything, please do one thing. Help us to reinvent capitalism. The world needs you now, as it says on the slide. Do one thing to help each other or help to make things better in your organization so that we can actually have a good feeling and become part of this movement. And with that, see you all in October. Stay good and until very soon. Thank you very much.